My quick scan 80 is indicating that the clock is inoperative on this system 80 MPU from a circus game. So I'm going to probe pin 37 as the clock input. So the crystal and the circuitry between the crystal and this processor is working correctly and providing a clock input. But here's pin 39, which is Phi 2, which is the clock to the other chips on the board, and nothing's coming out of there. So this processor is probably crocked. Let's 3, 4, 5, 6. That's the non-maskable interrupt pin. Nothing wrong with that. Let's, for giggles, check 34, 43. 34 is the read-write signal. I'm going to take that 6502 out and see where we get. So I've swapped out that 6502, and you can see this is pin 37, which is the clock input. I always use a socket. This is a NOS 6502 chip. Let's see. Made in the 24th week of 1984. Nice. And here's Phi 2, which is the clock output to the rest of the TTL circuitry. It's really only used by these 4 riots, or 3 riots at U4, U5, and U6. So the next step is to put this board in an actual game, and I'll use my Spider-Man, and we'll see if it's driving the rest of the switch matrix circuitry and the displays and the solenoids. I've installed the board into my Gottlieb Spider-Man. Let me close her up and boot it up. Normal 5-second delay, and she is running. Awesome. It's driving the playfield attract mode lamps. So let's put it into test and see what happens. Skip directly to lamp test. And then the coin door lockout, which you can hear. And now it's driving each of the lamps on the playfield. Awesome. Let's check coil test. It's going to skip coils 3, 4, and 7. Perfect. Switch test. And you have to wait for the 99 to come up. Otherwise, the switch test seems to go really slow for some reason. That's true of all System 80 MPUs. So I'm going across the diagonal of the switch matrix right now. And we'll do column 7, row 6, and row 6, or sorry, column 6, row 7. If you do 77 on these early Gottlieb MPUs, they tend to kind of go into a unresolved mode or something. I don't know. I always have to reboot it. Let's watch the ones come across. So it looks like it's driving the displays correctly too. So I'm going to say this MPU is good to go. And we will be back to test the driver board. Power supply has been rehabbed. You can see somebody replaced R10 with a 680 ohm resistor and CR7 with a 1N4738, I want to say. We do not have a 12 volt LED lit. That's weird. So I'm going to have to check into that. Of course, well, not of course, but whoever did this job didn't replace these headers, so I'm going to have to split this thing in half and replace these headers at the very least. I have the soundboard in the game now, and somebody in the past had made some repairs. They used axial caps to replace these two normally radial caps. That's okay. They recap down here also. And the important cap is this one here. The original one, I think, is a 470 ohm, but it leaks electrolyte out, and you can see where it has damaged the traces in the past, and somebody did a nice job of cleaning it up. So I have a game started. I'm just going to press some random buttons. Clearly from the game Circus. Let's see if the diagnostic button works on this one. It sure does. I've just started lamp test, and it was toggling a couple of solenoids, and now the lamp test is running. The two solenoids it was toggling were game over and tilt relay. And then over here, the coin lockout relay. That's the way it always starts lamp test. So it's chasing through each of the lamps. These 4 orange ones are the not version of these 4 green ones. So you'll either have, if this green one's on, this one will be off, and the other way around. You can see I do have one lamp out here. It's Q42. So I'm going to have to go onto the driver board, find out where that bad boy is, and replace it. Back on the bench, and I just booted this up, and you can see that Q42 is now fully operational. Let's run through the tests one more time. I can show you the solenoids also. Over here, 2 flashes there, 2 in the upper left now. And now it starts chasing all the lamps. The next test is solenoid test. It'll blink each of these 5, plus the lower one here. Remember, 3, 4, and 6 are not pulsed during solenoid test. So those are the 6 that got tested. The next test with this CPU board is switch test, which I've already done. And I've already done display tests. So the CPU and the driver are now good. The soundboard was good. I just have to get back to this power supply. All right, we're going to crack this power supply open. The way Gottlieb designed this, there's usually a 2N6057 or 59 here. Somebody has replaced this with a valid sub, a 6284. But this entire area here is used as a cold plate or a heat sink. And you have to simultaneously desolder both legs. Pretty easy with the blade. So to fit these new headers in, we need to enlarge some holes so that they do in fact fit. I always pull these pins nowadays. I've broken too many pricey side cutters in the past. Now, I've drilled one of these holes already, but you can see that this does not fit. So let's I've got a bit that's slightly larger. Most of the time I drill these from the other side to prevent any tear out of the PCB. I've got a wood block that I put on the other side. So let's see if it fits now. Of course it does. And none of these ever get out of my shop without having these detritus clipped off the end of it. So now it's just a matter of making a nice solder joint. So let's do that while we're on camera. So I hold the other side with my fingers. Tack one down. This has got a pretty big heat sink trace around it, so it takes a fair amount of heat. I like to make sure that it flows really nicely. More solder is not necessarily better, but that's a good joint. That'll last a long time. Now this joint, it attaches ground to this screw hole attachment point is not good. So I'm gonna take that off and I'm gonna get my big tip out, because heating up that end tire solder attachment or screw down point is really kind of hard without having a lot of heat. So let me get rid of that old solder too. I guess I could have just stripped that. And here's what I do. Your mileage may vary, but I like to put this thing on the other side of this hole so that sort of wire tension makes it want to push up against the hole. And I'll dab a little flux in there. This is Amtech, genuine Amtech flux, purchased from Northridge Fix Guy. You wouldn't think that a little syringe of flux like this would last long, but I have had this syringe for quite some time and it's not even close to running out. So here's my big tip. This one wraps itself around the legs of 0.156 headers, so it's quite capable of delivering the heat necessary to make a good solder joint on there. Now, unfortunately, what I was starting with there with that wire was pretty poor, so off it comes. Now let's wrap this around here. Pretty good. And then solder it down. Solder, solder, depends on whether you're in Canada or not. Says one of my the YouTube people that I like to watch, Blondie Hacks. So let's let that solder joint cool. My fingers are getting really, really hot right now. And we're good to go. So this again connects this screw down point to ground, and if you follow this trace all the way around, you'll find it's a negative end of this 470 microfarad cap. And we have our power supply working again. The problem with this LED, believe it or not, was the original LED was burned out. So we do have 12 volts, we do have 5 volts. You can see I replaced it with a slightly brighter LED, and I've replaced all those round headers with square headers, and here's our voltage readings. This is a nice trim pot somebody put on there, 5.11. You can see them right there. All those are unloaded, so those are all just fine. So this is a mod, a ground modification that I implement on most of the System 80 boards that come in here. This is the screw terminal that is attached to ground on the power supply, and I've used a 1-inch 6-32 screw and a couple of nuts that have the star washers on there to make sure that that doesn't loosen up. And then I've got 3 wires with single pin Molex 0.156 headers, and one with a, I call it a ringlet. Now the ringlet will go to the speaker in the back, the ground connection on the speaker on the back, and then each of these single pin connectors has a wire long enough to stretch to one of the boards, so you just plug it in like that and you're good to go. These are Trifurcon pins that I've crimped into here, so they should make a nice solid ground connection.